You're listening to the 123 show with me, Noreen Mir, on this Wednesday afternoon. I'd like to turn to our very first topic and our very first guest of today. I'd like to welcome back to the program independent strategist and former fund manager David Roche to talk about his new book, Death of Democracy, which focuses on how to invest in a world where democracy is in retreat. David, it's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm very happy to be back. And it's not about how to invest, it's about how to survive.
How to survive
in a world where democracy is dying.
Wow. All right. That's even deep. You're going to have to forgive me for my limited investment and financial knowledge, but I will try my best because it is definitely a topic that I'm interested in. And who knows, maybe Peter Lewis and I can co-host a couple of programs of... No, I'm just joking. Peter's listening right now. But back to your book. What is it about really then, David?
It's about two things. One is that democracy is, in a sense, attacked from within and without at the same time. We tend to consider that democracy is vastly, ethically, morally superior to everything else. But actually, it's an accident of history which came about because countries got rich and then they got democratic. But in recent times, it's actually clever, or I would say technocratic dictatorships which have lifted 2 billion people out of poverty, not democracy. So now democracy is competing with these alternative systems like China. Is that an exportable socio-political model? And at the same time, democracy is being attacked from within. And the attack from within is by populists who actually are attacking the whole institutional framework of democracy. And yes, it could die. It may just be an accident of history which has lasted a couple of 100 years and which will blow away to be succeeded by another form.
Yeah. Well, let's back up a little bit. So for some of our listeners who may not know what technocracy is, or technocrats, as you mentioned just now, David, China is an example of that. It's when you get experts in that particular field to run that area of government. So in Hong Kong, for example, we are bureaucrats who run it, you know, people who move across the education bureau to maybe the finance bureau and then into the food and hygiene bureau, because they are administrative officers and they have those skills to just move across. But in China, that's not really the case. It's not really quite politicians. They're not bureaucrats. These guys are technocrats.
Well, look, I'd put it this way. I think in 2011, 2012, when Xi took over, the whole social contract changed. Before that, you had this idea of the iron rice bowl, where everybody got to eat, and if the economy was bad, the state-owned industry stepped in and sucked up people into jobs that really didn't exist and fed them. He came in and he actually designed a whole new way of doing things. You can call it a social contract in a way. He said, look, we're going to create economic and research and scientific freedoms where people can, you know, really be world leaders in their fields. So very specialized, as you said. Government is not going to get in the way of that unless you step out of that green field into the political arena, which is the precinct of the party. And then you're in deep political problems unless you're absolutely towing the line. So what he did was he made this system which is designed from the top down, him to the Politburo, then to the party, and then to the people. And in a sense, what he's saying is, look, I'm going to use technology to watch you. I'm going to use technology to make you richer and to give you freedoms. But at the same time, this is going to be a very nationalist Chinese endeavor, even though it will avail itself of international knowledge and technology. And he's done that, and it's tremendously successful. Whereas if you, for instance, take an example. If you take, since 1989, the increase in living standards in China is 26 times. In Italy and Belgium, it's virtually zero. So you can look around all these democracies and you can say, well, it's fine to say, you know, you're a superior moral system, but you're not a superior economic system, and the burghers may prefer to have higher living standards than greater freedoms.
Okay. That's a very interesting way to put it as well. So why did you decide to write a book about this? Because,
like you, I'm bored of investment stuff, and I actually like to write about stuff that affects humanity, and particularly we're here. We're in Hong Kong right now, so we're right on the bridge between the kind of tradition of old-style bureaucracy, old-style, I wouldn't call it democracy, but at least asking the people, you know, whether they want to have a cycle lane or not. And on the other side of our now new bridge here in Hong Kong, we have this top-down dictated system principally by Xi himself, which is tremendously efficient at getting things done, but of course might turn out to be tremendously fragile to economic shocks of one sort or another.
Now, structure is everything, and I really like the way you structured your book. It's, as I was talking about it before we started the interview, it's almost like a long essay. So I think that there's enough meat on the bone for the readers to get into, but it's also not a really thick book where people might think, it's too much for this topic. I urge the listeners to go on Facebook. David is on Facebook Live as well. Noreen Mir on RTHK Radio 3. You'll be able to see David Roche with us this afternoon discussing his book, Death of Democracy, which teaches us how to survive in this climate. I've got his book in front. Maybe, David, you can hold it up.
I can help hold it up.
Yes,
I can do
hold it higher.
Something useful.
Yes. You designed the cover of this book.
Yes.
Talk us through it, because not only did you write it, you also designed it as well.
Oh, well, it's not very difficult to design a cover if you're kind of computer literate, which I suppose I am. You simply choose a Gothic subject, cut out some cut and paste features of the world's most popular
leaders,
dictators, and then you dig a grave and put the coffin of democracy in the middle of the grave. And then, of course, you have to go and add the Gothic things, the bats, the moon, the crumbling castles, and you're away. That's how I did
voila. Let's talk about China's technocracy and also US's technocracy, because it worked in China but didn't work so well in the US as well. They had technocrats, Timothy Geithner, for example, when he was, who was he, the Secretary of Treasury, didn't he have a Wall Street background? He didn't do such a good job.
No, look, being a technocrat doesn't mean that you know how to govern, or doesn't mean you know what to do, really, in any given situation. The point, I would say, in the US, you have got a very successful spread of technology. I mean, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Microsoft, you look at Apple, obviously this stuff didn't just turn up there by accident. There's something about the culture that does it. You have also a huge military technological tie-up, which in fact is what propagated the internet. So it is there, but what I'm saying, in China, it is direct. Technology is how they will get over declining population, because it will boost productivity. Technology is how you keep people happy, because they can have great shopping experience and accumulate all those material things which you and I know, being old, don't make you happy, but they'll think it does for a while. Technology is the way the state can control you, and technology is the way that you make your military more efficient. Now, that basically is what Xi is doing. He is creating this green meadow of freedoms around research, science, technology. And
they're all technocrats who govern those areas.
Yes, and they're all technocrats. And frankly, the young generation in China now have a freedom of choice about their economic destiny, which certainly their grandparents and their parents did not. So they're happy. What you don't have is the sort of freedoms which we tend to put together or bring together or say is identified with democracy. But what I'm saying,
the core values.
The core values. But what I'm saying is, actually, those core values are now very much under attack by populism, which is a product of democracy, which seeks to undermine it.
So why do people still hold this, the idea of democracy, why do they still think it's such a good idea then?
I'll tell you why.
When it's just a majority.
Because if you go back, even today, but if you go back 10 years, the world's richest countries, without exception, were all democratic. So people said, oh, well, to be rich, you have to be democratic, because only democracy will give you the freedoms for Bill Gates to create Microsoft in a garage, or for Apple to create an Apple, whatever. Only democracy gives you those freedoms. But that actually is just looking at the past. If you look at the history, democracy came about because countries got rich. It didn't come about in order to make countries rich. And the actual countries which are getting rich today are, not all of them, of course, but the successful ones are techno-autocracies, which means basically they're focused on technology as the driver of their power. And they are not democratic or anything like it.
Like China.
Like China. Frankly, I would say like Singapore.
Singapore, yes.
There's a lot of them around.
Yes.
And I mean, so this is
Singapore is sort of a democracy.
It's sort of a democracy, provided you don't put your foot out of line. But no, Singapore's achievements were when it really lifted itself out of very humble beginnings, were made under a system which I think you'd be pushed to define as democratic, but that's not necessarily bad, because it made them well off and it worked.
You're right. And all in 53 years of their short history as well. But then it depends how you measure success. Monetarily speaking, yes, they've done very well. But what about human rights or press freedom?
Yes,
So,
but you see, you're looking at it again
from a democratic
point of view. You're steeped in this kind of oldie worldy system, out of which I grow like a vegetable too. But the reality is that
I'm a journalist, of course. I want press freedom.
Of course, I mean, I like to be able to write what I want to write too. But it may not be that the burghers of those countries, the citizens of those countries, place such store by the same things as you. They're much more interested in having order, prosperity, education for their children, and so on, than actually being and wander around the streets safely at night, than they are actually, in love with all those democratic values which.
Yes, David, I take all those points, because sometimes you do question, with the fight for democracy, you sometimes do question, is democracy the best system? Will democracy answer all the problems we have in our society in Hong Kong? Will democracy solve the housing issue? Will democracy solve various other issues that we have in Hong Kong? And sometimes you have to wonder.
Don't forget, there's no reason in history to assume that democracy is a granite block in the middle of history which will never pass. If you go back to, for instance, various forms of government, like, for instance, empire, where are the empires today? They're gone. Okay. Actually, empires, though much maligned because they were kind of looked down on everybody who wasn't of the master race, empires actually brought technology and spread it around the world because they had the ability and the command structure and the wealth to do so. So, in fact, they brought the railways to China, and you can go on. Now, they're gone because they became inefficient, unsuited to what was going on. I would be very hesitant to make the judgment that democracy is there forever. Democracy came out of a set of economic circumstances which allowed it to prosper. But you and I think that it's a moral value. It may just be a historical accident.
But without democracy, how do you keep the government in check? You've got to make ways that they are accountable for the actions that they do, so that they don't end up corrupt, because without that check and balance, then the government can do whatever they want, whatever they see fit with the citizens.
Well, now, let me say two things in answer to that, which is a very good point. Italy is a democracy. Belgium is a democracy. Greece is a democracy.
And
corrupt,
their economy is...
But they're corrupt.
And their economy is not doing very well.
And their economies are absolute. I can't even say the word on RTHK, that kind of sticky
good,
stuff.
Yes.
Not good. Okay. China is far more sensitive to what is making its citizens unhappy than a democracy. In fact, a democracy is composed of layers of history during which it evolved. It's like a jellyfish. It is very good at absorbing shocks, but not very good at getting things done. China's system is the opposite. It's tops down. It's a hierarchy. It is very, very good at getting things done. But we do not know how fragile it is if things go wrong.
And you need that, because there are so many people who live in China. You've got to have one system that can rule all across China as well. That's why communism works for them, because if they can't allow the type of democracy that we envision here in Hong Kong. Because if Hong Kong has allowed it, then what if Shanghai wants it? What if Beijing wants it? What if other places in China want it?
But the other thing, the thing, perhaps a remaining important point, is the way that the government is sensitive to social needs like pollution, like education, like village rights in China, is because it can survey them. The surveillance system is one side of the technology which gives feedback to the government constantly. It mightn't always be very democratic in the way it operates, but it gives them feedback. They are much more sensitive to the emergence of mass discontent than the Mayor of London. Look at pollution levels. They're bad at the moment in Beijing, but they've made enormous progress, probably 40 to 50% reduction in pollution, even in Hong Kong. Fine, that took 4 years. You look at London over 4 years, the pollution level has done nothing but go up. So actually that underlines the difference. Democracy, good at absorbing shocks, but nothing ever happens. The kind of savvy dictatorship or the autarchies of
savvy
places
dictatorship.
like
That's a nice way
that's
to
a
put
nice
it,
way.
David.
They actually are very sensitive to these issues, and they are efficient at getting it done.
Okay, so let's look at all the on your book cover. You've got 4 leaders, or some people might call them dictators. Who's the savviest of them all?
Who's oh, shoot.
Xi Jinping.
Oh, yeah, I mean, good Lord, there's a decline. And I would put Putin as number 2. Putin's far from being a dog. And then, of course, you go down the scale to the Dutertes and, the Erdogans and people like that. And, let's even talk about Maduro in Venezuela. But basically, there are not that many of these really savvy dictatorships, but the ones that are really savvy. But once you get below that, then I'm afraid the quality count deteriorates very rapidly.
So what's your prediction then? Is democracy really dying then?
I think it's
or a degree of democracy.
I actually think the populist threat is very real to democracy. My concern, and should be everybody's concern, is the traditional parties have no response. Their only response has become more like the populists, which moves the whole spectrum towards populism, racism, all the rest. If we don't get a response to populism, which is an alternative rather than an aping of populism, then democracy per se will deteriorate to the point where it will be hardly recognizable. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. So that's the key. At the moment, I can see the danger that the old elites have been thrown out because they were allowed to become too distant from the people. The parties which were traditionalist and were their homes have actually moved to be more like populists, and I do not see a real challenge to populism at the moment in the States or in Europe.
Yeah, wow, David. Well, for our listeners, watch this space. Tell us a little bit more about how we can get this book as well. Definitely worth a read.
It's free.
Death of Democracy. It's
free, and the other books are free. You can go to www.instrategy.com and just press books and get it for free as a PDF. If you want a nice glossy cover, then you have to pay the cost of the book. But it is not a profit-making exercise. It's about, spreading and debating knowledge.
Yeah, great. David, remind our listeners once again, have you got a website and a Facebook where people can reach you if they want to find out more?
Yes, of course. The website is www.instrategy.com. And my Facebook is David Roche, and you'll find several photographs of dogs on it. Mainly island dogs from Hong Kong.
Yes, and that's what you came on our program
to
talk last time. Well, many thanks to you, David Roche, talking about his latest book, Death of Democracy. And I look forward to having you back on next time. Thank you very much.
Me too.
Another one.